Stevenson to move the motion, and then I'll call the Minister to respond. I remind ministers, other members, that they may only make a speech with prior permission from the member in charge of the debate and the Minister. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up. Order. Order. Blake Stevenson to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move that this House has considered planning and development in Bedfordshire. Mid-Bedfordshire, indeed all of Bedfordshire, has played its part in delivering new housing. My constituency was once home to the world's largest brickworks at Stuartby, and our communities bear testament to our brick-making history, with former clay pits now finding new life as lakes and homes for nature in the Marston Vale Forest. And with former industrial sites, including the brickworks at Stuartby and Kempston Hardwick, set to be repurposed as places to deliver the homes and jobs of the future. In the past month, we've also had confirmation of Luton Airport expansion, the announcement of the new Universal UK theme park at Kempston Hardwick in my constituency, and the publication of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. That comes on top of the recent announcements of East West Rail, local work being done to develop local plans in all three of our council areas, and I refer members to my register of interests as a Central Bedfordshire councillor, and of course the work of the government's New Towns Task Force. In this debate, I hope to highlight the ways in which the planning system can help shape the future of our communities in Bedfordshire, and some of the things that my constituents need assurance on from government. I want to be clear at the start of this debate, I'm not a NIMBY or a blocker. But if the government are serious about building the houses and critical infrastructure, we need to ensure that we do so in a way that is future-proofed and resilient, but also that we do so in a way that turns blockers into builders rather than creating a new generation of blockers. Because in my experience, most of the people that this government have labelled blockers and are not ideological, obsessive, standing in front of the bulldozers of progress. They're people fed up of bad development, of developers throwing up housing estates but not building communities, of soulless developments that you can find anywhere and where you could be anywhere, and most importantly, of developments that worsen quality of life. I will gladly give way.
I commend him on bringing this forward, and he's outlined some of the things that he can do, that he is doing in his constituency. That's using old industrial buildings for apartments. In Northern Ireland, we have a to add to the honourable gentleman's knowledge, hopefully. We have been repurposing current empty buildings in the centres of town, such as homes above shops, as an example. I said that to the Minister in a question in the debate just last week. Does he feel that maybe that's something else that could be used, and therefore you can restore and build up your town centres, number one, but secondly, ensure that you don't have the encroachment upon rural land, as so much happens across the whole of the United Kingdom?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I absolutely agree. I think there's a lot of support for brownfield first development, but also there's a lot of support for sort of gently densifying our towns and cities so that we have the houses where people want to live with the existing infrastructure. Now, this government has been elected with a clear mandate to build, 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 and I accept that, but I hope that it will do the hard yards to plan, plan and plan, and ensure that the 1.5 million houses that they build are the right houses in the right places as part of the right communities and with the right infrastructure. It is in that spirit that I bring this debate today, because Bedfordshire is not a place which is standing still. I congratulate the government on completing the negotiations begun by the previous government to secure the new Universal UK theme park at Kempston Hardwick in my constituency. That's going to be a game changer for our local economy, and I'll continue to support the government, Universal and our councils as it progresses through the planning system. But to maximise the potential of Universal, it'll be important to get the infrastructure right. That means we need to plan for the planes, trains, automobiles and accommodation. Through the planning system, we'll need to see work done to deliver the right accommodation available in Bedfordshire for people to come and stay. Hopefully to enjoy Universal and then stay a while in our towns and villages, spending their time and money enjoying everything that Bedfordshire has to offer. As I noted earlier in my speech, Mr Chairman, I understand that government has a mandate to just get on and build. I have some sympathy for their frustration with members of Parliament like me, who they see as trying to put the brakes on that ambition. But I hope that the Minister will recognise that is not my intention. I believe as fervently as he does that we need to deliver new homes for young people growing up right across Britain. But I believe that we must do so in a way that is sensitive to our countryside and our communities, and which delivers the right homes in the right places with the right infrastructure. The current planning system isn't working for anyone. Too often, it blocks good development, but too often it also allows bad development. Development that erodes local character, development that builds houses but divides communities, development that comes without the right infrastructure, leaving new residents and old alike frustrated and unwilling to accept that further houses the government want to deliver in their communities. As this government's planning reforms progress, I hope that they will take some time to consider how the planning system can more effectively protect the character of our towns and villages. How we can deliver the planning system that seeks to disarm those blockers the government is concerned about by addressing the things that they are concerned about, not one that seeks to do so by tying their arms behind their backs. That's a harder job, I accept, but is anything in politics that is worth doing easy? In Bedfordshire, I'd like to see the government give us the tools through the planning system to protect everything that makes our communities such special places to live. Protection for our historic character and our villages, protections for our beautiful and unique countryside against unending and unplanned urban sprawl, protections for the Great British Pub, indeed to build more of them as our communities expand, because in mid-Bedfordshire we're always doing the right thing. We've always taken our fair share of housing. We've even taken Luton's surplus housing need. We've done everything we need. We've done everything we were supposed to do, but our communities suffer the effects of bad development. Still, residents in Malden see development continuing to crawl even further up the slope of the Greensand Ridge, even as their flood risk steadily worsens. Still, residents in Wixham's find themselves fighting for a GP surgery that no one locally seems keen to take ownership of. Still, residents find themselves fighting developers who were keen to pocket the profits of development, but less keen to deliver on their promises of well-maintained green spaces, proper flood protections and local amenities. I'll gladly give way.
MP representing a fellow part of Central Bedfordshire, I know he knows all too well that while good people can, I think, have reasoned debates about the right locations for new housing, no one can defend the lack of infrastructure provision keeping pace with that development that we've seen in parts of Central Bedfordshire, which to me makes it all the more surprising that the council has one of the highest levels of unspent Section 106 contributions in the country. Would you agree with me that Central Bedfordshire owes it to its residents to make sure it's putting that money to good use, and we owe it to them to make sure we're removing all possible barriers to them provide the infrastructure our residents are crying out for?
I thank the honourable member for that intervention. Again, I must declare my interest as a Central Bedfordshire councillor, but I learnt recently of the sums that are held at Central Beds that from Section 106 that have been collected. They're very good at collecting the sums, but not necessarily spending it, and particularly spending it in the right places on the right things. I know that residents would be keener for development in their local communities if they knew the Section 106 was spent in their local community, not some other place elsewhere in what is a large unitary authority area. So I welcome the intervention and I thank him for it. We're still, Mr. Chairman, often those developers come in for big developments, put in planning applications, having those fights with the local community, make promises about local infrastructure, secure their planning permission, and then nothing happens. The community sits and waits while more and more other developments get planning permission around them, but developers don't get on and build the things they've gotten permission for. Research by the IPPR found that between 2010 and 2020, 1.1 million homes were given planning permission but not built by 2024. That is 1.1 million homes that defied the government's blockers and got through the planning system, but which did not get built. And so far, this government seems to have failed to grip that problem. There is nothing in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that even acknowledges it. If the government is determined to block the blockers and back the builders, perhaps it should take some action to stop the blocker builders who are failing to build out planning permissions they've received, because they are having a real impact. In Central Bedfordshire, planning inspectors have twice concluded that we cannot demonstrate a 5-year land supply in recent months. That means our countryside now stands virtually unprotected against speculative development. And yet our communities have taken more than 20,000 new homes in the past 10 years. And the Central Bedfordshire Local Plan sets out locations for thousands and thousands more. But despite its passage 4 years ago, key strategic sites in the local plan sit without a single shovel having been put in the ground. This government must hold the builders to account to get on and build things and not put the blame for our broken planning system onto the backs of my constituents' desire to avoid flooded homes or to see a GP. Looking ahead, this government is asking our communities in Bedfordshire to take tens of thousands of additional new homes. That future housing pressure will put our communities under huge additional strain. So we need government to work with us to do more to ensure that developers deliver what they promise and deliver at the right point in development. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my friend, the member for Mid Bedfordshire, for securing this debate. And he has rightly pointed to the fact that Bedfordshire is doing more than its fair share of growth, has for 2 decades, Mr. Swain. We're growing 2.5 times the national average, and that has put pressure on public services, particularly on GP services. I look at Biggleswade in my own constituency that's been waiting years for a health hub to deal with the growing population. But can I just ask my honourable friend, and does he, like me, want to hear a bit more clarity perhaps from the Minister today about new towns? Yeah. This is on top of the pressure we have from organic growth, the potential for a new town. And Tempsford in my own constituency has been highlighted one of those potential areas. We don't know whether the government plans that to be a 15,000 community, a 30,000 community, or some reports of 250,000. But also we have no clue about whether this government is committed to infrastructure first. So what are his thoughts about what the government should be saying now about new towns, potentially like the one in Tempsford?
I thank my right honourable friend for that intervention. I forget what positions people have had over the years. I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I absolutely agree. On the new towns point, which I'll come on to further in my speech, I think it's important that the government provides clarity soon on where those new towns will be built. But on the infrastructure point, it absolutely is true in my constituency also that people want the infrastructure at the right time, before people move into houses, not afterwards. Those promises need to be fulfilled much earlier in the development cycle. And I've mentioned some of those points also just now. I'd like to see the government commit to either requiring developers to deliver new infrastructure right at the start of development or consider a programme of investment whereby the government provides capital funding up front for councils to deliver that promised infrastructure, which it could then claim back directly from developer Section 106 contributions. I'd like to see the government go further on flooding and commit to a ban in all circumstances on development on functional floodplains. New homes mean nothing if they flood, and rivers and valleys have been here longer than we have. The water that flows through them is not simply going to get out of the way because of the size of the government's mandate. We must ensure that our housing policy keeps houses out of the way and restricts floodplain to amenity and recreational land as part of proper local placemaking strategies. We must also ensure that the sustainable drainage infrastructure that gets installed with housing is effective and properly maintained. Too often, we see and hear of SUDs that are nothing more than overgrown and sometimes blocked ditches, which offer no protection when the rain starts falling. We need a proper strategy to manage them, for example, with ownership devolved to properly funded internal drainage boards that can provide expert maintenance. And we need to embrace nature-based solutions to flooding, a particular opportunity presented by the government's proposed environmental delivery plans if they're strengthened to include a duty to consider such solutions. I would like to see the government commit to properly funding and empowering planners in urban areas with high housing targets to identify and release appropriate sites for urban densification, a point made earlier by the honourable member. For too long, urban authorities have been able to restrict land supply and the duty to cooperate to foist urban sprawl on neighbouring rural communities. Development that builds dormitories on our countryside rather than the densification in our towns and cities is development that fails us all. We must see and end the easy fixes and a focused strategy to densify our urban areas. In rural Bedfordshire, without such a fix, we face a real and significant risk that our villages will be forced under the duty to cooperate to take thousands more homes for Luton, in addition to the thousands of homes we took last time. Sticking plaster planning politics, where housing targets mean nothing because they are consistently and repeatedly delivered elsewhere, does nothing to solve the housing crisis, and it does nothing to appease the government's blockers, who rightly wonder how it can be fair that they must continue to pay the price for failures in urban areas to deliver housing targets. I'm okay for time, Mr. Chair. No, I'm not okay for time. I will conclude on that point, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I congratulate the honourable gentleman, the member for Mid Bedfordshire, on securing this debate and for so clearly setting out both his case but also his concerns in relation to the type of development and infrastructure provision he wants to see come forward in his constituency. So Desmond, sustained economic growth is the only route to delivering the improved prosperity our country needs and the higher living standards that working people deserve. That's why it is this government's #1 mission and why our plan for change commits us to building 1.5 million new homes and fast-tracking 150 planning decisions on major infrastructure projects in this Parliament. To support the achievement of those milestones, the government is progressing an ambitious planning reform agenda. In our first 6 months in office, we overhauled the National Planning Policy Framework to reverse the anti-supply changes made by the previous government in December 2023 and to introduce a range of new pro-growth measures. Our landmark planning and infrastructure bill, which will speed up and streamline the delivery of new homes and critical infrastructure, had its second reading on the 24th of March and it begins its Commons Committee stage tomorrow. We've made a series of other changes, including taking steps to implement a new plan-making system that will help facilitate sustainable growth. And we intend to announce, and in many cases consult on, further improvements to the planning system over the coming weeks and months. Now, the honourable gentleman has raised a number of distinct issues, a very wide range of distinct issues, I should say, and I will intend to cover as many points as I can in the time available to me. However, he'll forgive me if I set out, and I know he'll appreciate this at the start, that due to the quasi-judicial nature of the planning process and the potential decision-making role of the Deputy Prime Minister, I will not be able to comment on individual local development plans or individual planning applications, or for that matter, how individual local planning authorities may interpret national planning policy. So Desmond, we believe in a plan-led system. As I never fail to say, it is primarily through local development plans that communities can shape decisions about how to deliver the housing and wider development that their areas need, and those plans must remain the cornerstone of our planning system. However, we are clear that local decisions must be about how to meet housing need, and not whether to do so at all. Through the revised National Planning Policy Framework published on the 12th of December last year, the government implemented, as the honourable gentleman is aware, a new standard method for assessing housing needs to increase supply and better direct new homes to the areas where they are currently least affordable and therefore most needed. And I certainly recognise, and it's a point well made, the contribution that his constituency and neighbouring constituencies have made over recent years to housing supply. The revised standard method is now the mandatory starting point for planning for homes. Local planning authorities, including those in his constituency, are expected to use it, although, as I'm sure he'll be aware, they can seek to justify a lower housing requirement on the basis of local constraints on land availability, development and other relevant matters, such as national landscapes, protected habitats and flood risk areas. But we do expect all local planning authorities to explore all options to deliver the homes that their communities need, including maximising brownfield land, and he will know the proposals we've set out in respect of a brownfield passport to prioritise and accelerate the development of such land, but also working with neighbouring authorities on cross-boundary housing growth and, where necessary, reviewing Greenbelt. Probably worth me touching very briefly on specific areas he highlighted in terms of villages, in terms of rural areas, because the government is committed to supporting rural communities to build new homes for local people, and in particular to boost the supply of rural affordable housing. It cannot be right that young people in particular are often unable to remain in the villages in which they grew up. That harms not only them but their families, but the vibrancy and long-term viability of those rural communities. That's why national policy promotes sustainable development in rural areas and why we want to see more affordable housing in these areas, which will also contribute to our wider ambition to deliver the biggest increase in social and affordable house building in a generation. Now, national policy makes it clear that local authorities should ensure that their planning policies and decisions respond to local circumstances and support housing that reflects local needs. That includes promoting sustainable development in local areas and ensuring that housing is located in areas where it will maintain and enhance the vitality of rural communities. We also, as I've said, want more affordable housing in rural areas. We've taken steps already to support the delivery of that. For example, our golden rules for green belt development, which will ensure an affordable housing contribution 15 percentage points above the highest existing affordable housing requirement that would otherwise apply to the development, subject to a cap of 50%, will unlock new affordable housing provision in a range of rural locations. But there's also an important contribution that can be made by other measures, for example, rural exception sites. And as the Honourable Gentleman, I'm sure, will be aware, these allow local authorities to address the housing needs of rural communities by creating sites where local residents and others with a strong family or employment connection can live in affordable homes and in perpetuity. We recognise the strong support for them and the potential for strengthening policy in this area. That's why we made clear in our response to the consultation on the revised MPPF that we're giving further consideration to how we can better support rural affordable housing, including through the use of exception sites. That will include consideration of how we can drive greater uptake of rural exception sites and introduce a more streamlined approach, and I'll set out further details about our thinking on that matter in due course. The Honourable Gentleman and others who made interventions rightly referenced the need for infrastructure and infrastructure upfront in terms of development. We recognise the importance of ensuring that new housing development is supported by appropriate infrastructure. The Honourable Gentleman was wrong to say we've taken no action in this area to date. The revised MPPF published last year includes changes designed to improve the provision and modernisation of various types of public infrastructure. And the Government is also committed, and I very much take this point on, he's absolutely right, that we need to look to strengthen the existing system of developer contributions to ensure new developments provide the necessary infrastructure communities will expect. I will give way.
Richard Fuller.
I'm very grateful to Minister giving way and for his thoughtful speech. Just on this point of public service provision, can I just mention to him, one of the problems in Bedfordshire, and I'm sure some other high growth areas, is we're dealing with a backlog problem of the provision of public services due to the fact the population has grown for many years at a faster rate than it's been possible to provide those additional services. If this government is going to come forward, particularly with a new town in Thamesford, I think I would just say to the Minister, it's important that he looks at both addressing that legacy issue, that backlog issue, as well as what the provision may be for the new additional house that may come with the new town.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that point, and it's well made, and I will certainly note that we've had discussions about the matter previously. I think in general terms, I'd say a couple of points on infrastructure provision. Firstly, local development plans should address needs and opportunities in relation to infrastructure and identify what infrastructure is required and how it can be funded and brought forward. And when preparing a local plan, practice guidance recommends that local authorities use available evidence on infrastructure requirements to prepare an infrastructure funding statement. I've mentioned some of the other changes we've made in terms of the MPPF. The honourable members will know that the Government also provides financial support for essential infrastructure in areas of greatest housing demand through land and infrastructure funding programmes, such as the Housing Infrastructure Fund. But what I want to make clear that what we've announced so far is just a first step. We recognise there is more to do in this area across government and with the sector to make sure the right infrastructure gets built. It was a problem, I say gently to honourable members opposite, that the previous government did not manage to find a solution to in 14 years, and it is a thorny one. There's no simple and straightforward answer, but we're very cognizant of the need to do more in this area, not least to ensure that we get more buying for communities in terms of the development that needs to come forward. And I very much take the point and agree with the fact that there is too much bad development, and I think this plays unhelpfully into the YIMBY-NIMBY debate. I've never indulged myself in that debate. I find it reductive in many ways. But it is certainly the case that while there are a group of people in the country that want no development whatsoever anywhere near them, and we will very happily take those people on, there are a far larger group that wants good development in the area with good amenities and infrastructure. And we've got to ensure that exemplary development there is therefore the norm, not the exception, as it is now. Very quickly touch on Greenbelt, because the Honourable Gentleman mentioned urban sprawl. The manifesto on which the Government was elected is clear that the Greenbelt has an important role to play, and that a number of its intentions, including preventing urban sprawl, have served our towns and cities very well over many decades. We will always look to brownfield first. Ours is a brownfield first approach, as was the previous government. As I've said, we took measures in the MPPF last year to strengthen that approach to brownfield land. We're consulting on brownfield passports. But we've also been very clear that there isn't enough brownfield land in the country on brownfield registers, let alone in locations that is viable and able to be brought forward to meet housing demand and housing need in full. So we do need to look to a more strategic, a smarter way to release the right parts of the Greenbelt primarily in the first instance low-quality grey-belt land, and then, because of the value attached to the green belt by the public, ensure there is a clear quid pro quo there in terms of golden rules to ensure that sufficient rates of affordable housing and infrastructure come forward. In the time left to me, I'll cover a couple of the other issues honourable gentleman raised, the environment, new towns. I'll touch very briefly on Universal Studios, although, as I'll come to explain, I'll be limited in what I can say on that point. He will know that when it comes to development and the environment, we are absolutely convinced we can do better than the status quo, which too often sees both sustainable house building and nature recovery stall. Instead of environmental protections being seen as a barrier to growth, we want to unlock a win-win for the economy and for nature. As he will know, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill will introduce a new nature restoration fund that will unlock and accelerate development while going beyond neutrality to unlock the positive impact development can have in driving nature recovery. He's submitted many written questions to me on this point in terms of the details, so he's familiar with our approach, but I very much look forward to his engagement as the bill progresses. On Universal Studios, briefly, I will give way.
Just very briefly, I wonder if the Minister would take the opportunity to talk about floodplains and building on the floodplain. You may be planning to go onto it, but it's a matter close to the heart of my constituents and also constituents in North Bedfordshire particularly. I think it's important we don't build houses in areas that are going to flood.
I will turn to that point very briefly, but just on Universal Studios, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government has agreed in principle to consider any proposal. Given the proposals remain subject to a planning decision, I'm sure you will appreciate I can't comment on any proposal, as to do so could prejudice the position of the Deputy Prime Minister, but should the Department receive such a request, it will carry out a proper and impartial consideration of the planning merits of the proposed development. On flooding, which he's just asked me to address, we are clear that all local plans should be based on the best available flood risk data. The revised NPPF we published last year makes clear that developments of all sizes should use sustainable drainage techniques where the development could have drainage impacts and should have appropriate maintenance arrangements in place. These changes will mean that sustainable drainage technologies are taken up more widely in new development, but I can assure him we are continuing to explore what further changes might be necessary. On a related matter, to avoid the issue of existing sewers not being able to adequately cope with new developments, we had an extensive debate on this just a few weeks ago, Sir Desmond, in terms of the process of, if you like, the planning for the water cycle and the investment cycle around the water sector being somewhat out of line with the planning cycle. There is more we can do in this area, and we're giving due consideration to that. And then finally, I should touch on new towns. Honourable members are aware the Government is committed to bringing forward the next generation of new towns. This Government's New Towns programme will include large-scale standalone new communities, but also a large number of urban extensions and urban regeneration schemes that will work with the grain of development in any given area. The unifying principle will be that each of the new settlements will contain at least 10,000 homes, although we expect a number to be far larger in size. Collectively, we expect they could provide hundreds of thousands more homes in the decades to come. As I've said, in relation to development more generally, we want exemplary development to be the norm, not the exception. The next generation of new towns must be well-connected, well-designed, sustainable and attractive places where people want to live and have all the infrastructure, amenities and services necessary to sustain thriving communities. The New Towns Code will ensure they deliver to the highest standards and help meet housing need by targeting rates of 40% affordable housing, with a focus on genuinely affordable social rented homes. As honourable members are aware, last year we established the Independent New Towns Task Force, chaired by Sir Michael Lyons, to support this mission. It will be submitting its final report, including its final shortlist of recommended sites, and I do not have that shortlist to hand, so I cannot tell the honourable gentleman whether Tempsford or any other site in the country will be the location of a new town. We await the task force recommendations this summer, and then ministers will select from those recommendations. With local buy-in where appropriate, but we're very clear that we will make these decisions in the national interest where we need to do so. I will give one...
Very quickly, whether the Minister could confirm whether new towns will be inclusive of current house building targets or in addition to.
I think I've answered a written question on this to him, but I will put it on the record again, and I understand the need for clarity in this area, not least because they will only begin construction towards the end of the Parliament. The Government has been clear that new towns will deliver over and above the targets produced by the standard method. We will, of course, keep under review how the task force forthcoming recommendations on new towns interact with housing targets across the country. To conclude, Sir Desmond, I congratulate the member for Mid Bedfordshire once again on securing this debate. I thank him for outlining his views on planning development in his constituency. The Government is committed to establishing a planning system that delivers the homes.
Order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m.